Hey, shalom, everyone. Welcome to the Way Wednesdays virtual Midrash. We have been going through the Torah portion, and you know what? We have come to the end of the Torah portion, and now we're going to start over. However, before we get there, I want to just look at the last couple verses in Deuteronomy. Now, I want to remind you, if you like this study, if you like the ministry, you can always go to patreon.com/Doug Hamp, and you can give little or as much as you want. You can also go to the Way Congregation, and you can give through the app or through the website. So just so you know. All right, so we are in Deuteronomy 34, and we've come to the end. Now, who wrote this? Well, certainly, it's hard to write your own epitaph, right? So this had to be written by somebody else. Probably Joshua wrote the last little bit of this book to close it out. But understand here, it says, Velo kam navi od b'Israel ke Moshe asher yeda'o Adonai panim el panim. But since then there has not arisen in Israel a prophet like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. And all the signs and wonders which the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt before Pharaoh, before all his servants, and in all his land, and by all that mighty power and all that great terror which Moses performed in the sight of all Israel. So there was nobody like Moses. He was on really his own level. And we don't even see anybody come after him who has the same type of flair. Probably the guy that comes the closest would be Elijah, right? Elijah did some pretty amazing things, but he still didn't even come to the same level as Moses. And then, of course, there's one other guy, Jesus, right? So yeah, he's pretty significant for sure. But, leaving him out for just a moment because he's kind of God and everything. So, Elijah probably comes the closest. And in my humble opinion, I think Moses and Elijah are going to be the two that will come during the tribulation in the book of Revelation. But that's a whole different study, isn't it? All right, so that takes us to the end of this Torah portion. It's hard to believe that we finished yet another year, but with every little bit of sadness, when we come to the end, guess what? We get to go right back to the beginning. And I'll tell you what, Genesis has got to be one of my favorite books, especially those first 11 chapters, because there are so many, kind of crazy things that we find in that book. So let's go over there right now, and we're going to get started. Just some absolute mind-bending stuff. All right, so here we are in Genesis chapter 1. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, ve'haaretz hayta tohu vavohu, ve'hoshech al pnei tehom, ve'ruach Elohim merchefet al pnei hamayim. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now, we could spend a whole bunch of time just on that. And I think we will, actually. We're not in any rush to get through this. As I've gone through this for the last couple of years, I've kind of highlighted some different things, but we're supposed to do chapters 1 through 6 tonight. We're not going to get anywhere near all of that. But I think that if we can understand these first several verses, it helps us in so many ways. Now, obviously, when we come to the beginning, it raises the question of how did we get here? Now, a lot of material scientists, I'm talking about people who believe in matter, who think that matter is the prime thing that got everything going, they would suggest something called the Big Bang. And while I do see some evidence for that, there's a lot that they are leaving out. All right. And I say that not just because I'm a creationist or because I believe in God, but I'm going to quote some people who are also very eminent scholars in their fields. Now, all these guys have since passed away. But when we come to the question of the origin of the universe, there's a big question, of course, how did it get here, right? So when we come to this, we come to guys like Max Planck. All right, Max Planck was one of the what we call the fathers of quantum physics. You may say, what about quantum physics? Who cares about quantum physics? Well, you should care about quantum physics. If it weren't for quantum physics, we would not have the transistor. And without the transistor, we would not have not only transistor radios, but we wouldn't have things like computers and the internet and a whole bunch of stuff that we very much take for granted. You know, that little thing you carry around in your hand all day and you check it probably 500 times a day. That thing, yeah, that cell phone, that is all because of quantum physics. All right. So quantum physics is absolutely the foundation of our modern electronic movement. All right. So we are very much indebted to quantum physics. All right. So one of the fathers of quantum physics was Max Planck. And he said it so well. I'm just going to quote what he said. Quote, I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. All right. Did you get that? So what does he think is fundamental? Consciousness. All right. Now he goes on. And I quote, we cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything we regard as existing, postulates consciousness. He goes on to say, as a man who has devoted his whole life to the most clear-headed science, to the study of matter, I can tell you as a result of my research about the atoms this much, there is no matter as such. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particles of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind the force the existence of a conscious and intelligent spirit. This spirit is the matrix of all matter. Okay, that's a really big statement. So where did matter come from? It came from a mind. It came from a consciousness. That is what he is telling us. You have Eugene Wigner, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1963. He stated, it was not possible to formulate the laws of quantum mechanics in a fully consistent way without reference to consciousness. Another one, Sir James Jean, he's a quantum physicist. He said, mind no longer appears as an accidental intruder into the realm of matter. We are beginning to suspect that we ought rather to hail it as the creator and governor of the realm of matter. All right, then we've got French physicist Alain Aspect, noted for his experimental work on quantum entanglement in the 1980s. He said, the very study of the external world led to the scientific conclusion that the content of consciousness is the ultimate universal reality. Then we have Roger Penrose, another noted quantum physicist. He says, I think that matter itself is now much more of a mental substance. All right. And lastly, we have Gary Schwartz, professor of psychology, medicine, neurology, psychiatry, and surgery at the University of Arizona. It's a lot of stuff. Quantum mechanics explicitly introduced the mind into its basic conceptual structure, since it was found that particles being observed and the observer are linked. These results suggest that the physical world is no longer the primary or sole component of reality, and that it cannot be fully understood without making reference to the mind. Wow. Okay. And of course, there's more that could be said on this, but I'm not going to keep going over this. All right. Wow. Okay. So quantum physicists, some of the most prominent quantum physicists are saying, where did everything come from? It came from a mind. Now we have also part of this Torah portion, or the Parashat HaShavua, the portion of the week, is John chapter 1, verse 1. All right. And I think most of us are pretty familiar with that passage because it is such a great passage. But let me just bring that up really quick here on the software so you can see that. All right. So John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All right. So you have God. Then you have this thing called the Word. All right. A word suggests what? Well, a mind, right? You have intelligence, right? So both in Genesis, also in the book of John and other places, it's talking about a mind. This is what the Bible tells us. In the beginning, God, right? He is that mind that these quantum physicists have discovered through their study. God is the mind. And so what this tells us is that matter is not the original thing, but God is the original person. Okay, he's the original mind, and that all matter comes out of mind, right? Albert Einstein would go on to say something very similar to this. He said, concerning matter, we have all been wrong. What we have called matter is energy, whose vibration has been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses. There is no matter. Wow. Okay. Well, that's kind of interesting, right? Another so-called father of quantum physics was Niels Bohr, and Niels Bohr um, talked about this mind substance. Okay. Now let me just go on to read from Hebrews chapter 11. It says, we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. All right. So all the matter in the universe did not come from things that are visible according to the Bible. And guess what? Drum roll, according to quantum physicists, right? So what does this tell us? This tells us that um, we're not talking about matter originally. Matter is a derivative of what? A derivative of what? Of mind. Matter came out of a great mind. Who is the great mind? God is the great mind. And he spoke, right? He spoke the word, the logos, then articulated what would become. All right. Now, when God spoke, what happened? Well, things came into existence. We call that the universe, right? For lack of a better word. And we've talked about already quantum physics. Okay. Quantum physics is incredibly important. Why is it important? Because it's telling us how the universe works. Who spoke that into existence? Well, God did, right? So that's pretty simple, right? God is the one who spoke and things came into existence. Now, it's interesting. What quantum physics also talks about is something called the state of potentiality, or a superposition, where something exists both as a wave and as a particle. All right. So let's go back to our text there in Genesis chapter 1, but looking at verse 2. All right. So again, you guys can see that. Fantastic. So what did he say right here? The earth was without form, right? All right, so the earth was without form. Now, there is a theory, it's called the gap theory, and it suggests, which I disagree with, but it suggests that between Genesis 1:1, right, so right here, and Genesis 1:2, right here, there's this gap of time. There's eons upon eons of time, and something happened, that there was this angelic rebellion that took place and all this different stuff. And well, I don't see that in the Bible. It is a gap theory because it's not in the text. Okay. But rather, and what they do then with the earth, they say that the earth became without form and void. In other words, it used to be, and then it got all disintegrated, and then God kind of patched it back up and did something different. That's not what the text is saying. All right, what's happening here in the Hebrew, when you have the subject at the beginning of the sentence, and it's coming after the word ve, or and, that's introducing what we call a parenthetical statement. This is oh, by the way, here's some information that you could really use to understand the story better. All right, so in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. By the way, let me tell you about the earth. Okay, by earth at this point of the story, I don't mean the thing you're standing on today. I mean something a little bit different, right? And that's what the author, God, goes on to tell us, that the earth was without form and void. In the Hebrew, that's tohu vavohu. Now, what have the quantum physicists called it? The state of potentiality, or superposition, where it can exist in both states. That's exactly what the Bible's telling us. Tohu vavohu is really a wonderful way to explain that, or way to describe that. All right. And so only by observation, this is according to the quantum physicists, only by observation can that state of potentiality, where something is existing in two states at the same time, or superposition, both as a wave and a particle, only by observation does it then, quote unquote, collapse into becoming just a particle. Now, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because as we look through Genesis chapter 1, let's see what God does. And God saw. Now that's interesting, isn't it? And God saw. Okay, so that's day 1. And we've got day 2. So they were the second day. Okay, and what had happened? And God saw, and it was good. All right, you're starting to get the drift here, right? And then we got the third day, and guess what? And God saw, right? And you get the idea, right? All the way down, God did what? He saw. He observed his own creation, which quantum physics tells us is necessary for something to go from being in a state of potentiality to actually collapsing and becoming a particle instead of this kind of unbound wave. All right, so to go from tohu vavohu, the state of potentiality, into a concrete, here it is, form, it had to be observed. And indeed, God observed his own creation, right? So in the beginning, God created a state of potentiality that the Bible calls tohu vavohu, and then God observed as he spoke, right? He spoke into this ether, he spoke into this potentiality, and then things came out of it. Things came into being, and then he observed it, and then it collapsed, and it became an actual substance, an actual thing. It became matter. Wow. I mean, this is blowing my mind, right? This is really cool stuff. And this is all thanks to quantum physics that has now finally caught up with what the Bible was saying. But to be fair, I do believe that quantum physics really does help us to understand what the Bible is saying, right? But sometimes, the language was there, but we didn't have the capacity to really understand it other than by faith, which isn't a bad thing. But I love it when we can now take modern science and say, oh, that makes so much sense, right? And again, looking at the language, we see that it lines up incredibly well. All right, so we've only made it through 2 verses, basically, okay? But we're getting there. All right, so the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now, wait a second. All right, so he's hovering. The word there is merachefet. This is the same word that we find where an eagle is brooding over its nest. So kind of that little flutter that a bird might make when it's brooding over its nest. Okay, whether it's a chicken or an eagle, it doesn't really matter. But it's that brooding, it's that vibrating, right? That vibrating. Now, what did we learn from Albert Einstein? Well, he talked about how there is. Let me go back here really quick in my notes just so I can give it to you. But all right. So, we'll go back with Max Planck. He first talked about this idea of a vibration. And then what Einstein said is Einstein discovered that matter is energy whose vibration has been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses. All right, so what we just saw there in Genesis 1:2 is this idea that the Spirit is vibrating over this potentiality. It's putting energy into it. Now, you guys know the famous equation that Einstein discovered, E equals mc squared. I mean, it's a beautiful equation. And, we found it to be true. You might say, well, what does that mean? Well, E is energy, M is mass, and then C is the speed of light, which is called the constant, and then it's squared. Okay, so the speed of light squared times mass equals energy. All right, now you can, as with any kind of equation, you just have to balance it, and you can turn it around. Okay, so you can also get mass from energy. Now that's interesting, right? And then of course you have the speed of light. So we have this state of potentiality. Then the first thing that God speaks is light. He speaks the constant into existence. And then out of all that, we start getting more and more matter. Wow. Again, quite mind-blowing when we start putting it all together. Now, if you've ever wondered, what does it look like, this whole E equals MC squared thing? Well, anytime you've had a campfire and you throw a log on the fire, what happens to it? Well, it turns into plasma, right? It starts burning, and you are literally seeing mass going from mass into energy, right? So you're seeing E equals MC squared, but you can have mass go from energy. We understand that, right, very well with a campfire. But what the formula is telling us is that energy can also become mass. Now that's interesting. Now we actually do see this on a very slow scale, of course, when the sun shining its energy onto, say, a tree, and then that tree and takes the leaves use the energy. They convert that with the chlorophyll on the leaves, right? And then, of course, with some already pre-existent matter, to be fair, okay, it takes nutrients from the ground, okay? So it's not magic, but still, it is converting energy and it's turning it into mass, all right? So now, God doesn't need photosynthesis to do this, right? He created that, but he is also the one who just kind of got it all started in the beginning, right? So it's an amazing equation that Einstein discovered, but we also see that whole idea of the vibration of energy being infused into the creation in Genesis 1:2. This is why I love this book, because it has so many cool things in it and you can really geek out, right? So I kind of like to geek out. It's kind of fun. All right. So then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Vayomer Elohim yehi or vayehi or, right? Let there be light, and there was light. Now, I was reading a book by Neil deGrasse Tyson some years ago called Astrophysics for Those in a Hurry. I think that's what it was. And his order of, let's call it creation, was really the same order as what the Bible has. He even had a chapter called "Let There Be Light." And I was like, well, that's funny, Neil deGrasse Tyson. You don't believe in God, and yet you're kind of echoing what the Bible is saying. Now, obviously, Neil deGrasse Tyson would not subscribe to the biblical model, because according to the Bible, this all happened in a rather short amount of time, whereas according to evolution in the book, The Big Bang Theory, it took a much, much longer time. However, what is so interesting when we start looking at the idea of the Big Bang, all right, so those first, they say the first, couple microseconds or nanoseconds or whatever it was, a very short amount of time, you had this little tiny dot. And in the dot was all the matter of the universe. But not only that, guess what else was in that dot? Space. Yes, that's right. Space itself. So think of, in the beginning, God created a balloon. Okay. And in the balloon, it's not inflated yet, but he just created it and it's ready to be inflated. So then the inflation happens. That's called cosmic inflation, right? That's where the space, the expanse in there. Where do we see the whole idea of expanse? Well, we sure do. Glad you asked, right? So then God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, let it divide the waters from the waters." All right. So that word there in Hebrew is rakia. Let me just show you what some other translations, such as the ESV, do with this word. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters." Okay, so I think that is a much better translation. Sometimes people kind of trip over this whole word of firmament, and I understand why. Firmament comes to us from the Latin firmamentum, and it means something that's kind of solid. All right, and that's where some of the flat earthers have gotten their ideas. I don't want to go there, but that's a crazy idea. But what the Bible is really talking about, what the Hebrew is saying, the rakia, is an expanse. All right. And we see this in the book of Isaiah, that God is stretching out the heavens. right? Well, this is exactly what Edwin Hubble discovered when he was looking through his telescope and he kept noticing something called a red shift. All right. So if you've ever heard a siren, an ambulance go past you, when it's coming at you, it's kind of sounding like it's compressed, right? And then it goes past you, then it's woo, right? That's called the Doppler effect. That is where as the sound is coming from the ambulance and then it's coming at you and the ambulance is chasing right after it, because sound is relatively slow, the movement of the ambulance is actually compressing that. And then when it goes away from you, now the sound is the source of the sound is getting further away, even though it's kind of being stretched out, right? So what Edwin Hubble has discovered is that the light that he saw in his telescope is moving away from us because it's shifted red. That would be the equivalent of the ambulance sounding funny as it's traveling past you. That's the red shift. All right. So the red shift is what led him to deduce that, hey, if things are moving away from us, well, just put two and two together. That means that it used to be closer to us, right? It's really that simple. So that is how he came up with this basic idea of an expanding universe. And I would totally agree with him, right? Okay. Again, I just said that in Isaiah, it says that God stretched out the heavens. The word rakia is an expanse, right? There's an expansion happening. And what have scientists discovered? Well, Edwin Hubble and others, that yes, the universe is expanding. Now, going back to the cosmic inflation idea, what's so interesting about that is that they say, okay, this isn't me, but they say that this speed, the rate of the expansion of the universe is happening faster than the speed of light. All right. So light is traveling at 186,000 miles per second, or 300,000, what is it, 299,000 point something kilometers per hour. It's pretty fast. Okay. So that is how fast light travels per second. So if the universe started like this, like a small balloon, and now it's a bigger balloon, that means that the rate of expansion happened faster than the speed of light, and is still happening faster than the speed of light. So that means from creation itself, that first initial moment, to boom, it didn't take that long for things to get from here to here. Even though to travel, if I now travel at the speed of light, if I were traveling in a rocket ship from the speed of light, going from wherever that middle of the universe is to now the outside edge, it might take me 1 billion years, okay, to travel at the speed of light. But the rate of expansion of the universe was significantly faster than the speed of light, okay? This has profound implications for the age of the universe, right? So now as they look out, they believe that the universe is anywhere from 13 to maybe 15 billion years old, right? Why? Because that's how long it takes for light to travel from this edge back to us. By the way, this is a little secret, but every direction we look out, we're always seeing a red shift. That kind of implies that we're, I don't know, kind of at the center of something. I don't know, just a thought there, okay? But if every direction you look and you see a red shift, that means that everything is traveling away from us, which means that, well, we're in some kind of a center of something, right? I don't know if we're, exact middle of the universe. Who can possibly know that? But that's what the evidence seems to suggest. Okay, I digress. All right, so with this idea of cosmic inflation, it means that the universe does not necessarily need 15 or 13 billion years for it to come to what it is. Okay, it could have happened a lot faster. All right, now there's a whole bunch of stuff, and of course we don't have time to get into it tonight, which I do apologize about. But when we get to the fall, when sin, death enters into into all of creation, that is when this clock begins. The clock really begins, and the clock I'm talking about is the one where we look at things like carbon-14 dating, or what's the other one? Radiometric dating, right? So what is radiometric dating? Well, you take a rock and you're like, well, it's disintegrating. Okay. My granite countertops are falling apart. Don't worry, it'll take a long time for them to fall apart, but they are falling apart. They're disintegrating. When did they start disintegrating? That's the big question. According to the Bible, there was no such thing as death or entropy until Adam took that fateful bite of that fruit. That is when death came into him, and also everything associated with him, which is interesting because, and we'll get to this in chapter 2, I think we have a little bit of time here, that God made Adam out of the Adamah, out of the earth, right? So they're of the same substance. So when Adam, the federal head of the Adamah, of the dirt, when he fell, when death entered into him, it also spread to everything. That is the moment that the clocks, the radiometric clocks, began. All right, because that is when things began to decay. Now, what we don't know, and this is an assumption that many scientists make, is that the rate of decay has always been the same. And I don't believe that we actually know that. I think there's evidence to suggest that the rate of decay may have gotten faster at the time of the flood. There were probably a lot of volcanic eruptions that were happening at that time. And so it would have spewed out even more radioactive material, thereby hastening the demise of the human race. And that's exactly what we see, is that people go from living some 900 years old to then 600, 500, 400, till you get down to Abraham, who lived 125 years old, and then down to us, who are 80 to 100 is usually where we check out of this planet. So there's so much evidence about the first, about Genesis. It's really amazing stuff. All right, so we've gotten through just what here, four verses. We're getting there. Now let me back up, because this is a question that comes up. When does a day begin? Okay, well, let's think about it for a second. In our system, when does a new day begin? Well, it begins at midnight, 12 midnight, right? 12 a.m. is when we start a new day. Why should it start at 12 midnight? I have no idea. Okay, but probably because on the average, if you think that the sun goes down about 6 o'clock and then it comes up about 6 o'clock, midnight is the midpoint between those two sixes. Okay, and so that's perhaps why the Romans decided to put it there, and that is something that we adopted from them. But in the Hebraic mindset, the night, or the new day, begins at sundown. All right, now why would we suggest that it begins at sundown? Well, let's go back to the text here. All right, so God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. All right, now notice here, God called the light day. Vayikra Elohim la'or yom. See that right there? He called the light day. What do we call it when it's light out? We call it day, right? And the darkness he called night. What do we call the darkness? We call that night as well. But here's the little trick. So the evening and the morning were the first day. Were the first what? They were the first yom. Okay. Wait a second. I thought we learned that light is the day and darkness is the night. That's true. But when you put them both together, what do you call that? You call that a day. And what do we call it in English? We call it a day, right? We talk about yesterday, day before that. And when we say the day before that, we're talking about that entire 24-hour period that includes light and darkness. We call that day. All right. So we already have that in our language. And guess where that came from? It came from God himself. God is the one who decided on this nomenclature, and we're still using it today. I'm good with that. Okay. So the Romans probably came up with 12 midnight. But in the Jewish mindset, in the Hebraic mindset, the new day always began at sundown, okay, or when you could see maybe 3 stars or something like that. So probably on average for our clocks, let's just kind of put it in a perspective here. That means that if the sun goes down right here, we're in the fall right now, and of course climactic, and the world conditions were a little bit different when God created everything, obviously. So sundown probably happened around 6 o'clock, maybe 7 o'clock, something in there. All right. And so once the sun went down and then it became dark, that became the beginning of the new day. And it would go, of course, until the next evening, right? So you have there 2 evenings. Evening to evening is what was called a day. All right. That was the demarcation of a day. And so we have the evening and the morning were the first day. And then we see this formula. So the evening and the morning were the second day. We see this all the way through. So the evening and the morning were the third day, and on down the line. This is what is describing a day. In fact, in the first day, the language is a little bit different. So the evening and the morning were the first day. That's what it says in English. But in Hebrew, it says Vayihi Voker Yom Echad. Okay, so Vayihi Erev, Vayihi Voker Yom Echad. So it's not first day, but it's actually one day. All right, that is giving us the definition of what a day is. What is one day? One day equals evening and morning. Okay, so well, evening, we know when evening begins, right? It's kind of when the sun goes down, right? That's the evening, and then morning, right? And then it's going to go until, well, the next evening. Proven here by Genesis chapter 1, right? Because when does the next day happen? Well, evening and morning. Third day, evening and morning. Fourth day, evening and morning. I think you guys get the idea. All right, so that is all right here in the text. Isn't it just beautiful? I love it. There's so many cool things. All right, now we're finally on to the second day. Then God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. All right, so again, this word rakia, I think firmament is a terrible translation, but I kind of like the New King James translation, so I have to live with that. But as we saw in the ESV, that has the word expanse, and I think that's a much better translation. Expanse instead of firmament, whatever that is supposed to be. All right, so in the midst of the waters, there's now an expanse. So what that suggests is, if we go back to our balloon analogy, that instead of it being latex on the outside, that there's some kind of water barrier. Now, what is beyond that? I don't know. God, maybe? It's not entirely clear. And then you say, well, that's insane. There can't be water that far out. Well, who says there can't be? Right? I mean, have you gone to the edge of the universe to see what's at the edge? Even astrophysicists don't know what is beyond the edge of the universe. They know it's expanding, but expanding into what? It's not expanding into space, because space is included. That's the thing that's expanding, is space. Space itself is expanding. So what is space expanding into? That's the big question. And they don't know. Well, one possible answer is hyperspace. But what in the world is hyperspace? I mean, it must be a different dimension of some sort. But what is that? Now, there's this whole idea of Everett's multiverse theory. It's become very popular, especially if you watch a lot of the Marvel movies and a lot of the other things that are happening in science fiction nowadays. The multiverse has become very popular. I do not believe in the multiverse. I think that's yeah, well, I just don't believe in it. I won't say what I think of it, but I think it's fiction. Let's put it that way. And so there is something outside of our universe, and that would be God. Or could it be that somehow we're in him? But again, it's hard to say, because we can only go so far in our universe, and beyond that, we have to just kind of take what the Bible says. So God spoke, and this universe came into existence, there was this watery, this fluid thing, and then this expanse is growing in the midst of this watery mass. Why not? I mean, why not? It's probably a better explanation than hyperspace. And that's what's happening. All right. So thus God made the expanse, right, the rakia, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the expanse, and it was so. And God called the expanse Shemaim, heaven. Now, it's interesting that this word Shemaim has the word mime in it. Mime is actually dual. It means that there's two of something, just like I have a yad and I have yamaim, right? I have two hands. I have ayin and einaim. I have two eyes, ozen, oznaim, right? So anything that comes in a pair, it has that ayim ending. So it suggests from the Hebrew. Now, this is not absolute fact, right? But this seems to be the case that the word shemaim, which is she means that, right? Or it could be from the word asher maim, shemaim, that that which is water, something like that. And it's dual. Why would it be dual? Again, we're not entirely sure, but maybe there's a heaven above this expanse, and then there's a heaven within the expanse. That seems to be the case. So he called it Shemaim. He called it heaven. We know that Paul talks about there's the first heaven where the birds fly, the second heaven where the stars are, and then the third heaven where God is. All right. And so that would kind of go along with that idea. All right. Then God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. Now we're really getting into the formation of the planet itself. All right. So we still have this water, and then Earth is going to come out of this watery mass into what we have today. Okay. And so it says, and it was so, and God called the dry land earth, right? He called it eretz, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. So he called those yamim. All right, now that right there is quite interesting, and God saw that it was good. If let's take a look here at my globe to get another perspective. And all right, I see that there's some questions in the chat. I'm going to get to those guys. Hold on a second. All right, so here's the Earth. All right, now how many seas do you see here? You might say, well, I see the Atlantic, and I see the Indian, and I see the Pacific, and then I got the South Antarctic Sea, and then I got something up here. Yeah, but really, how many do you see? Because I only see one. All right. I see one on this globe. Okay. Because they all, guess what? They're all connected, right? See, if you want to cheat and you want to look around here, look at it closely, right, guys? It's all one big sea. All right. So that's interesting. So when God created the seas, that means that there was probably more land than there was water. All right. Now, this is a solution that really helped me understand something, because I was kind of disappointed when I read Revelation 21. All right. So it says, I saw a new heaven and new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. Also, there was no more sea. I'm like, well, that's a bummer. I really like the water. I like planet Earth with lots of water. Why would he take away the water? But then I noticed something. Wait a second. It says sea. It's singular. But in the beginning, God created the seas. Oh, okay. So in the age to come, when God, fixes the planet, there's not going to be one gigantic ocean that we call different things, but it's really one gigantic ocean, one gigantic sea. It's going to be subdivided. That means that there's going to be land between every one of these seas. Now, they may still be gigantic. Now, I grew up in Michigan, where we have the Great Lakes. Okay. And of course, if you're from Michigan, you get out your map here and you say, well, I'm from up here. Okay. So we had, of course, Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, et cetera, Lake Erie down here. Right. So those are the Great Lakes, and they were huge, right? I remember sailing on these as a boy, and they were just enormous, but they're relatively small compared to the ocean, right? So it could be that God is going to restore a whole bunch of Great Lakes in the age to come. And that may have been what the world looked like before the flood. In other words, there was lots and lots and lots of water. And you could definitely enjoy a whole bunch of water sports, but it wasn't one massive sea. Where did that sea come from? You might say, wait a second. Well, again, if we had time to get through Genesis chapter 6, we would know that God sent this thing called the flood. That's actually in chapter 7. Maybe we'll get to that a little bit later, or maybe next week, hopefully. And we're going to see that the fountains of the great deep broke open. And so there was presumably water under the earth, under the crust of the earth. And then that water came up. And that is where the water came. A lot of the water came for the flood. All right. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So if you've been a little bit bummed about not having enough water in the age to come, fear not. There's still going to be plenty of water. Okay. Then God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth. And it was so, and the earth brought forth grass, the herb that yields seed according to its kind, and the tree that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Now, what's so interesting about this? I mean, there's a lot of things that are interesting, but God said, let the earth do it. Right? God didn't sit there and say, I'm going to create the apple tree, and I'm going to create the orange, I'm going to create the flowers. I mean, ultimately, he's responsible for those things, but he said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree. So he established the different kinds, grasses, herbs, fruit trees, okay? But he did not, at least according to this, he did not designate every specific type of thing there is. So this is where I think that as a creationist, and if you're a creationist like me, that we should cut a little bit of slack to some of our fellow humans who maybe don't believe in the Bible, but they see incredible patterns. They see a type of, shall we call it, evolution within the natural order of things. And they say, look, there's all these different genus types and families that are all related to each other, and we can kind of trace them back. And yes, they're absolutely right, because that is exactly what God did. He did not specify every last thing. He told the earth to do this. That's just blows my mind that God said for that to happen. But here's the important thing. He said, let the grass, the herb that yields seed. Seed, that's a really important word. All right. The Hebrew word zera. In Greek, it's the word sperma. Okay. Sperma, seed. What is inside of a seed? Well, you start looking down into it and you see the husk and the shell, and you keep going, and you're going to find the chromosomes, and you get to the genes. What's inside of that? You get down to the DNA, right? The double helix. What's inside of that? You get to A, G, T, and C. Yeah, get my letters right. Nucleic acids. What's inside of that? Well, nothing exactly, but there's still something, and something we can't put our finger on, something we can't touch, we can't see it. It's called information. Inside of a seed is information, and it's the information that differentiates a sponge from a human, right? It's the different information, even though they're all quite related. And we can see that, monkeys and humans are very much related, but so are a bunch of other things very closely related. It's because there's different information in them. Information, right? That's going to become a very significant word, especially when we get to chapter 3, because we're going to see that God's going to say to the serpent, he says, I will cause enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. Okay. I wrote a book on that, right? That's a fascinating thing. And it's going to explain some other kind of weird mysteries like Genesis chapter 6 and the sons of God coming down, and they took the daughters of men and they begot this weird race of hybrids called the Nephilim. And you're like, wait, that's in the Bible? Yeah, it is in the Bible. And understanding a little bit of information science or some genetics can help us to understand how these things are possible. Okay, but again, I'm getting ahead of myself. My apologies. All right, so that's the third day. Now, wait, if according to evolution, that, all these things took millions of years to slowly develop, this would not be possible if you believe in the gap theory that it took a long, long time, or sometimes theistic evolution, that everything took a very long time. So theistic evolution would suggest that, yeah, the Bible's true, but what it's really talking about are, day one is an eon of time, day two is another eon, millions of years of time. But that means by the time we get to day three, we have the earth bringing forth grass, seed, and all kinds of stuff, but there's no sun yet, because that's not going to happen until day four. That's a real problem, isn't it? All right, so that is one reason I believe that the young earth model works a whole lot better, at least within the context of the Bible. And I think when we start looking at things like cosmic inflation and a bunch of other stuff, that we can actually account for a relatively young earth if we start kind of putting some of those things together. But again, that's a whole big topic, and I'm not going to go into all of that tonight because it's a really big topic. But there are a lot of good answers. All right. So I say that with caution because I know there's always something out there, but it's a fun study. All right. Verse 14, then God said, let there be lights in the firmament, in the expanse of the heavens, to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons, and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the expanse, the firmament of the heavens, to give light to the earth, on the earth. And it was so. Then God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. So the evening and the morning were the fourth day. All right, so he now is creating the sun, the moon, and the stars on day 4. All right, so from the Bible's perspective, earth came before the sun. And I think, again, I can't answer every question here. I'm sort of trying to think of what you guys might be asking. I can't get to all of them, but there's so much there. It's very, very rich. Now, don't miss the fact that we have that these signs are for le moadim. Okay, a moed or moadim are the appointed times. In Leviticus chapter 23, God talks about his appointed times, his feast days. And there are 7 or 8 if you count Sabbath. So you have the weekly Sabbath, right? And the God's going to create that at the end of this creation week. But then he also is going to give us things like Passover. And then he gives us unleavened bread. And then he gives us first fruits. And then Shavuot or Pentecost. Those all happen in the springtime. Then we have the fall feast, which we just celebrated. They were a lot of fun. We have trumpets, and then Yom Kippur. And then we have Sukkot, and that's where I was last week. I was celebrating the Feast of Sukkot, and about 100 of us were camping out at Cherry Creek Reservoir. It was a lot of fun. If you missed it, I hope you can join us next year. We're going to do it again, and we're looking forward to it already. All right, so he made for the Moadim, right? So the sun, the moon, and the stars are for the signs and the seasons, and for days and for years, right? So God created the big clock in the sky, essentially. And at certain points on that clock, he says, okay, it's break time, right? In fact, every 7 days, God says it's break time. It's time to just relax, just chill out. We're going to call it the Shabbat, the Sabbath. And then there are punctuated times throughout the year, like Passover. And God says, okay, it's break time. It's the 14th of Nisan. You need to take a break. All right. And then we have the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Don't eat any leaven during this time. It's really not that bad, just in case you're wondering. And then he has first fruits. Okay, take another break. All right. Then there's a pause for about 50 days. And he says, okay, take another break. And then we have all summer and you can go back and do your stuff. And then the fall feast come along and we got the Feast of Trumpets. And he says, take a break. And then we have Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And God says, you better take a break. This one's super serious, super important. And by the way, afflict your souls a bit. So we don't eat on that day. And then 5 days later, God says, okay, now it's party time, but take a break at the beginning, at the end. And so that's what we do, right? Those are those punctuated times. Now, it always baffles me that some people think that by doing that, we're somehow going under the law and it's so difficult. I think they're a lot of fun. I think they're just a bunch of parties, except for maybe Yom Kippur. But otherwise, they are a good time. And so God created the clock in the sky for the regulation of the days and the years, but also those appointed feast times. God is the one who created those. All right, in verse 20, let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of the heavens. So God created great sea creatures and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Now, notice here. When you talk to evolutionists, they believe that life started where? In the water. Okay, I'm talking about biological life, not just grass and stuff. All right, but biological life, they believe, started in the water. What does the Bible say? It started in the water. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? All right, so we have an abundance, and God says, let the waters abound with an abundance of fish. Now, was God creating every little different kind of fish, or was he kind of setting things in motion? And then there was some evolutionary process. I'm not saying over necessarily millions of years, but I'm just pointing out the fact that it says, let the waters abound with an abundance. And so it was, right? So now we know that God is responsible for the creation of the great sea creatures and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded. So he is the author of these different things, but he said to the waters, do this thing. Kind of interesting. And then we have the birds, right? So again, many biologists who talk about how everything got started, right? Life started in the water. That's what the Bible says. And then come the birds. That's what the Bible says. So God created the sea creatures, etc. And every winged bird according to its kind, and God saw that it was good. And he said, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. All right, so that's now the fifth day. Wow, I just love this story. Then God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind. Now, notice again, let the earth do this. Cattle and creeping thing and beasts of the field, or the earth, each according to its kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Again, let the earth bring forth. That's kind of interesting, right? That they just came up out of the earth. That's kind of the impression you get. And now, were these all specifically in the mind of God? Very possibly. Or it could be that God had a template in mind and he got that started, then other things developed from there. We're not entirely sure, but the text is very interesting in that way. And then the crowning achievement, mankind. Isn't this great, right? Man is the last thing to be created. Interesting. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of man, he created him, male and female, he created them. Wait a second. God says let us make man, right? That's Adam, nase Adam, let us. Now, the whole let us, probably there a reference to Father, Son, Holy Spirit, but I won't go into that too much because that is a whole nother topic, right? But God made us in his image and his likeness. Now, I have some kids, and guess what? They kind of look like me, all right? And they kind of act like me to some degree, okay? Well, so they're in my image and they're in my likeness. And we see the same thing that when Adam has a son, Seth, he's in his image and in his likeness. Probably Seth looked a bit like his dad and probably acted like a bit like his dad. So when God made us, he made us to look like him and then also to act like him. Right. And part of that was free will, right? So that we have the ability to self-govern. We can choose for God or we can choose against God. Sadly, we chose against God. Don't worry, God's fixing that. But God created us with that capacity to choose as well. And that's very, very important when we start looking at this whole thing. But God created man in his image and his likeness to have dominion, authority, rulership over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God made man as the king of the planet, essentially, that we get to rule everything. Now, it doesn't mean we're supposed to oppress animals. So I'm very much let's be nice to the animals kind of guy, but we do have dominion over the earth. Now, in the story of the fall, some of those things are going to get a little bit twisted and mucked up a bit, but this is how God originally created us, right? Now, notice here, this is for all the male chauvinists out there that think, oh, God created man better or over woman. Well, no, he created us equal. He created male and female. He created them different roles, different parts, right? Different parts to play. I mean, right? Obviously, there's different biology, very much related, but complementary in their relationship one to another, just like hand and glove. Okay. You need both of them, the hand and you need the glove, right? Those are complementary to each other. And so that is what God did is he created male and female. Now in chapter 2, we're going to get more than just a summary statement, God created male and female. We're going to actually see how he did it. So sometimes people think, well, in chapter 2, it's a whole different story. That's not true. It's the same story, but it goes into more detail about how he did it. Okay. And so obviously chapter 2 is incredibly important. Then God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, see, I've given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of the earth, on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed. To you it shall be for food. Also to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, and to every thing that creeps on the earth, in which there is life, I have given every green herb for food, and it was so. So what did God tell them to eat at the beginning? Vegetables, okay, or vegetables or fruit, or maybe grasses as well to some, herbs, okay. So that's what God created. Then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day. Wow, what a great story. And we can't finish there because really, whoever put in the chapter break made kind of a bad choice. Okay, so it's not done till 2 verse 3. That is where we had come to the end of this creation account. Thus the heavens and the earth and all the hosts of them were finished. Okay, so they're done. But there's one more thing. Wait a second. He created everything. But we still have one more thing. This is the nice, beautiful epilogue. And on the seventh day, okay, keep that in mind, not the first day, but the seventh day, God ended his work. Vayechal Elohim bayom hashvi'i malachto asher asa vayishbot. All right, see this word right here? Vayishbot. And he rested on the seventh day. Vayishbot, well, guess what? This is the word Shabbat. Shabbat, right? The thing that we call the Sabbath or Sabado. That's the Sabbath, okay? The Shabbat. It's to cease, desist, rest, etc. So God wasn't tired like, ooh, it's been a tough week. I gotta get a breather. All right. God wasn't at all exhausted and didn't wear him out to do all this, but he specifically, purposefully created yet one more day, right? He did everything in 6 days. Good job, God. That's amazing. He's got a day to spare. And that's the whole point. He's got a day to spare. So get everything done in 6 days, and then you have a day to spare. How do you spend it? Relax. Spend it with the Lord, spend it with your family, go outdoors, soak up some sunshine, but don't work, because you got 6 days to do that. And if people would follow this, I'm convinced that we'd have far less suicides, we'd have far less work-related stress and burnout and ulcers and all the stuff that comes with that, because many people never take a day off. You got to take a day off. I think it would heal a good part of our societal woes. I can't put a number on it, but that's a lot. Okay. It's estimated that 75% to 95% of all illnesses are due to toxic thinking. And toxic thinking is going to happen when you have too much stress and you worry, because what? You don't have a day off. You need time to rest. Now, let me just be very clear. God set aside the seventh day as the Sabbath. Now, can you rest on a Wednesday? Sure, you can rest on a Wednesday. Can you sing songs to God and Jesus on a Tuesday? Sure, you can do that as well. You can do it on a Sunday, for that matter. I'm not opposed to that. But let's just be clear, the day that God created for this express purpose of resting was not the first day, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day, but was specifically the seventh day. And it's pretty easy to count to 7 and then start over, and count to 7 and start over. All right, so I'm convinced that the day that we call the Sabbath is the one that goes all the way back to the very beginning. And notice here, you might say, yeah, but I just want to take Sunday off. You're welcome to do that. You're welcome to do that. But just notice what God did on the seventh day. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made. Right? So this one has a specific blessing attached to it. Is there blessing associated with taking Sunday off? Sure, because taking a day off is always a great thing. But it's on the seventh day that God blessed it and he set it apart. He blessed it and he made it holy. He set it apart. Why? Because that's the day that he rested from his work. So I grew up keeping the Sunday as the Sabbath. That's what I had heard, and I thought that was true. And then it finally made sense to me. Wait a second, God didn't change. He never changed the week around. And if there is indeed a blessing on it, why would I not go after the blessing, right? Why would I want to fight God on this matter? It doesn't make any sense. And so I finally got to that place. I'm like, I'm just going to stop fighting God and just go with it, right? And if there's a blessing on it, then that's what I want to do, right? Because I want the easy street. I don't want to make my life any harder than it has to be. I got enough problems. I don't need to add to it. Why put more stress on something if it's not necessary? All right. Well, that takes us to the end of the creation week. Wow, there's been so much. It's really been awesome. Let me get to your questions, guys. If you have more questions that I maybe don't get to them, you can always submit them on the app for my show, Bible Questions Answered, and I'll take them there. Okay. So here we go. This is from Stephanie. I have a question about this. Does Adonai Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh sustain life by speaking his vibrations? Wow. Okay, that's a rather deep metaphysical question, and I would love to give that a decent answer, but I think probably the short answer is yes. Okay, and I think there's a whole bunch more that could be said about that. Okay, and I hope to get to that in my book, Rethinking Prayer. All right, so I'm gonna have to leave you there on a cliffhanger. I'm sorry about that, but there's a lot to that. Okay, so here's a question from Ski the Hebrew. I read that Einstein revealed to a group of rabbis in New York that he got E equals MC squared from the first 2 verses in Genesis. I do not know the answer to that. I'm just ignorant on that question. So maybe the thing that you read is correct. That would that would not surprise me. Okay, let's just put it that way. So, you know, that would be really cool. A lot of great ideas have come from the Bible, right? So, but it's always fun to see how it all comes together. All right, this is Nana from Montana. In 7th grade, I got into a discussion with my science teacher on evolution. If we evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? Never got an answer. Well, sure. I mean, what they would say is that there have been these different branches, okay? And if you kind of put it yourself in their mindset, it does make some sense, okay? That the evolution of the survival of the fittest is that the animals that breed together and then have a successful successful evolutionary function are the ones that are going to survive in order to pass on their genes. And so what they would suggest is then that you had another branch, or so you had monkeys here, and then there was kind of this branch over here that was also successful, and then it eventually evolved into humans. Now, I'm not subscribing to that idea. I don't believe that we came from monkeys, but it's not easy to just write that off 100%. Okay. And kind of what we looked at a little bit is that God did say, let the earth bring forth these various creatures. Okay. So there may have been some, micro evolution within speciation that may have occurred. All right. So again, there's a lot there. So let's see. I heard the James Webb Telescope disproved the Big Bang Theory. I think I read some headline to that same thing, Skeeta Hero. What I always find helpful is to kind of give the news cycle time to get through these big, bold headlines. Because remember, the guys that are writing newspapers, what are they trying to do? They're trying to sell, newspapers or news websites, right? They want you to go on that. So that's basically clickbait. I do not believe that the Big Bang Theory has been disproven by any stretch of the imagination. So I would wait for that one to cycle through to see what they're really trying to say. I think that was just a clickbait headline, frankly. Okay. All right. And let's see here. Did I get through? Some people are reading Crypt the Image. I'm glad that you're enjoying it. That's really awesome. All right. And here's another question. What do you think Jesus meant? What do you think Jesus meant? We would go on to do greater things than him. How can this be possible for us to do anything superior to Christ? Is this why Satan wishes for our destruction? Well, I think you can look at greater in two different things. It can be quality or quantity. And I think rather than quality, I would suggest that Jesus was referring to quantity. All right. So that's where I would put my money on that question is, and it may be that you, referring to the collective you here, that all y'all will go on to do quantity greater, not quality greater. Okay. Because I mean, it's hard to outdo someone who just raised the dead, walked on water, and a whole bunch of stuff, right? I mean, I don't see us having come anywhere close to that as far as quality goes. But as far as quantity, I think that if we were to put the last 2,000 years together and to sift out all the bogus claims from the real claims, we'd still have a lot of real claims in which quantity-wise, we were doing more things than the Lord. All right. Another question. All right. Looks like I got all the questions. Fantastic. Well, thank you guys. Always a pleasure. I'm glad that we got to get started once again in this fantastic book. There's so much more to come. And sadly, I can't get to everything because there's just too much. But if you're interested, remember that I did write Crypt the Image 1, 2, and 3. So if you want to go into a whole bunch more detail on that, I've written a bunch of books, actually. So you can go to my Amazon author page, or just go to Douglas Hamp on Amazon, and you can get my books there if you're interested, or you can go to douglashamp.com and you can check them out there as well. All right, many blessings, and until next time.